Ukraine is losing on the battlefield. Zelensky's government is in its last legs, maybe even its last moments, actually, because the contact line, the front line, is in a state of collapse for Ukraine. Not surprisingly, this whole war was misconceived and generally falsely reported by the mainstream Western media, because Ukraine could not win this war, and it is, in fact, losing 1,000 to 2,000 soldiers every day now to death or serious wounds. This is a disaster underway. It's hidden from view by the official narratives of the U.S. government and the British government, especially by NATO spokespeople. But this is a disaster, and it's a disaster that was largely caused by the United States, tragically. Again, basic facts that are hidden from view. But the U.S. Walked Ukraine into this disaster, and some of us have been saying this for years, and now it's becoming plain as day as Russia advances on the battlefield. Well, so Zelensky he's either delusional or just doing what he does. He's an actor who plays his part.
That's probably a great time to start looking back, because actually I imagine you have a lot of thoughts on, the days after the fall of the Soviet Union, how poorly Western media reported on it and how poorly they sort of understood what NATO and others were doing at the time. So, Dr. Sachs, I guess maybe one good place to start on that question is, what does Western media get wrong, and why are they so bad at reporting the truth, the reality of what happens between Russia and now other countries in Eastern Europe?
Well, what Western media in the mainstream do is report the official narrative. So the question really is, what does the U.S. government get so wrong? And then why is it parroted by the New York Times or the Washington Post or the other mainstream media? What the U.S. government has gotten wrong all along since 1989, or I would say since 1945, is the idea that there could be peaceful relations with Russia, just normal, cooperative, peaceful relations. But from the first moments after the defeat of Nazi Germany in 1945, the U.S. government prepared for war with the Soviet Union, turned on what was an ally during the war and made it the great enemy. We came close to global annihilation between 1945 and 1989 in the Cold War. I played a role as a much younger economist in the late 1980s and early 1990s as the Cold War was ending, or so I thought. I advised the Polish government. I advised the Gorbachev government, his economic team. I advised the Yeltsin government. I advised the Kuchma government of Ukraine. So I was there during that period, front row seats at least. And what I saw was that the United States was eager to cooperate and to support the likes of Poland, for example, or the Central European countries that had been under the Soviet sphere and Soviet domination. But when it came to the Soviet Union and then later to Russia, that remained an enemy, even at the end of the Cold War, completely contrary to what I saw, what I understood, what I believe till today, that what Gorbachev and Yeltsin were offering was normalcy, peace, cooperation, the chance for a very different and vastly safer world. Well, the United States would have none of it, in fact. What the U.S. wanted was domination. It wanted hegemony. It wanted full spectrum dominance, as the Defense Department famously put it. What the U.S. wanted was expanding NATO. even breaking apart Russia, because that was a part of the CIA ideas that we can intervene in the periphery of Russia and perhaps break it apart on ethnic lines, just like the Soviet Union had broken apart. So this is what I did not understand as I was trying to give economic advice at the end of the 1980s and early 90s. My advice was help the Soviet Union, help Russia, help, because that's what I understand good economics and good geopolitics and security to be. But all my recommendations were rejected. Basically, whenever I said help the Soviet Union or help Russia, no, are you kidding? No way we're going to do that. And I didn't quite believe them that they would be so blind to the usefulness of this. But, if you look back and now with a lot of documents that have been exposed and explained, we never ended the Cold War in 1991. We continued to prosecute the war against Russia. Already by 1994, in the Clinton administration, the decision was taken that NATO would enlarge, contrary to promises solemnly given in 1990 to Gorbachev and to the Russian leaders, to Yeltsin and others, that we would not move 1 inch eastward. 1994, Clinton already agrees, not only will NATO move eastward, it will move to Ukraine, to the 2,100-kilometer border with Russia.
Yeah, and
that is the provocation that has gotten us into this mess.
And this period, to me, 1989 to 1994 or so, is, to me, one of the great hinge moments in world history, because you can quite easily imagine a world in which the United States has a relationship with any country that is similar to that we have with, say, Germany or Japan. I mean, we were in a cataclysmic world war with Germany and Japan, and here we are, some decades later. There's some tensions here and there when it comes to trade and other foreign policy, but in general, we're allies with those countries. There's no chance we're really going to war with either at any time soon. So welcoming Matt Taibbi, who was a journalist in Soviet Union,
materialized out of thin air
at the time. Yeah. So I know that you lived through this period, and you were equally fascinated by this piece that Professor Sachs has written for us. I wanted to ask you if you wanted to ask him to tease a few parts of it out, or.
Yeah. First of all, hello, Professor, and thanks for coming on and joining us.
Of course.
With this discussion, I was really amazed by some of the things in this essay. Could you talk first about, you advised Yegor Gaidar, I believe he was still the prime minister of the Soviet Union at the time?
No, he was prime minister of Russia, Gaidar. I advised Zelensky earlier, who was the economic advisor to Gorbachev.
Right, I'm sorry. Okay, this was in November 91, but you advised him to go to the G7 and ask for debt stabilization. What happened when he did that?
Basically, when I was asked to come help, why would they ask me for all, for God's sake? And the answer was that I knew something about financial stabilization and financial crises. And I had a view that, by the way, went back to John Maynard Keynes, who was the great British economist who was involved in the Versailles negotiations after World War I. He said, don't make a harsh settlement. You'll pay for that later. Very prescient, very powerful analysis. I was very much influenced by that as a young economist. And I said, don't make a harsh peace, and don't let the Soviet Union or Russia spiral into a deep financial crisis. Well, they had a deep financial crisis. That's why things were falling apart. And they asked me, help us get out of this financial crisis. And I took the normal tools of the trade, for example, saying you need to not pay the debt temporarily, at least, maybe permanently, but you need a debt standstill. In other words, you're running out of money. You're in the deepest crisis. This is a historic moment of profound significance. I'm talking about 1991. Russia is about to become an independent, and wants to be a democratic country. My God, this is phenomenal. So this is a big deal. So get some space on your debt because you don't have financial reserves. You're in deep financial crisis. So that's what I suggested to Yegor Gaidar, who was then the head of the economic team for Boris Yeltsin, who was about to become president of an independent Russia.
Right.
And it was the kind of advice I had given to Poland 2 years earlier, which had worked to stabilize Poland's economy, and the kind of advice I had given a few years earlier than that to help end a hyperinflation in South America. Now, I gave it to Gaidar. I sat in the anteroom as he walked in to meet with the so-called G7 deputies. That means the finance ministry deputies, or in the case of the U.S. Treasury undersecretary or deputy secretary on finance. And this was a key meeting in November 1991. And I sat in the anteroom, and he came out ashen-faced. And Yegor, what happened? He said, they told me you pay every penny of interest as it falls due, or we stop the shipments of food on the high seas that are coming as emergency relief for you. Unbelievable. But that's actually the advice. That's what they did, by the way. They continued to pay until they went into default early in 1992 because they literally ran out of foreign exchange reserves. So they went to zero. And then massive crisis came. And the U.S. is just sitting there, I thought, sucking its thumb. But it was even worse than that. It was watching a crisis unfold with no real intention to do much about it, as far as I'm concerned, because nobody, I thought it was ignorance, delay, bureaucratic ineptitude, but it turned out to be a persistent policy that the U.S. was just not going to help. What it was going to do was build U.S. power in the region. It was going to expand NATO. It was going to make its demands. It was going to tell Russia, yeah, you can be a player. Listen to us, join our team, do what we say, don't complain. That was the idea of U.S. foreign policy beginning in 1991-92. Yeah, but it was, in a way, a continuation from 1945. Interestingly, and I need to mention it, back in 1945, we were allies with the Soviet Union against Hitler, and the Soviet Union had lost 27 million people. This unbelievable disaster had borne the brunt of defeating the German army. And within weeks or months of the end of World War II, we started to hire German Nazi scientists, those, of course, who had made the V-2 missile systems, germ warfare specialists who had tortured inmates and killed inmates at concentration camps, done human experiments. We took them on because the idea already in 1945, and then it just built in 46 and 47 and 48, was the next enemy is the Soviet Union. We need to prepare for total war. So this idea is very deep-seated in America. But I thought, hey, I could not have been more thrilled in 1989, 90, 91 to be witnessing the birth of worldwide peace in front of my eyes. But we just wouldn't have it.
The end of history.
Now, and so there's kind of multiple layers of the scandal and the way that the Western world treated Russia. One of them is the macro level that you talked about, kind of driving them into one of the greatest, maybe the greatest financial collapse in world history.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but a big one. A big one.
It's a big one.
Very big one. But then the second one is on the micro level, the extraordinary theft and corruption around around the privatization of national industries. And you've gotten lumped into that sometimes because the Harvard Institute for International Development, which you were involved with, had some of its members involved with that. But so can you talk about that connection, like who was involved with that? And I know you write in the essay that anyway, just you go ahead and tell them.
Yeah, just very, very briefly. Yeah. My gig and my side of the work was finance and macroeconomics. I'm an international finance economist by training. I had stopped the hyperinflation. I had helped cancel debts. I had helped Bolivia to get back on its feet. I was asked to help bring in Western money to help stabilize the situation in the Soviet Union in 1990-91. That didn't work because the White House turned it down flat, the whole idea. And then again for Yeltsin, where I thought this is a slam dunk. Now we have an independent Russia, post-communist, democratic, all the rest. I thought it was slam dunk. They turned that down again. I was not part of privatization. And I was not asked to be, frankly, because there were other people involved who didn't really even want me to be involved. Okay, that's fine. So I was doing my thing, not succeeding, because I couldn't convince Washington about any of this. By the way, which was really strange for me because what I had recommended in Poland had worked. And so I was saying, it's the same, multiply by 4, it's bigger country. But they said, no, we're not doing that. No, we're not doing that. It was very, very strange. Now, on the privatization, I was not part of strategy or even asked. I had my own views, which were very, very different, but it wasn't my bailiwick. I actually, after a year of trying to help Yeltsin, I told him I can't help. They're not interested. I can't be helpful for you. I can't bring any money to Russia to help the stabilization. A new finance minister was appointed at the end of 1992, and he begged, a very nice person named Boris Fyodorov, who died young. He begged me, please stay, please help. So I stayed another year, completely ineffectually, because the Western idea was quite different. The U.S. government idea, the IMF idea, and so forth. So I stayed, and then I resigned at the end of 1993. The big things that created the oligarchs were things like a shares for loans scandal of 1995-96, which, by the way, was also part of financing Yeltsin's reelection campaign at that time. So I was nowhere nearby at all in any of that, except that I knew the people and the players. One of them described to me, laughing, how the whole shares for loans thing had gone down, and I found it disgusting, corrupt, gross. So I called U.S. government officials and IMF and World Bank officials. I said, well, maybe it's like the line in Casablanca. There's corruption going on in this place. There's gambling going on in this place. But I was serious. You really need to look into that. And I just got blank stares back because, of course, they knew what was going on, but they weren't interested. Well, I took a lot of shit for that, if I can say that on your show. For years, completely the opposite. I was the one trying to say, stop it. But of course, I wasn't on the inside. I wasn't anywhere near, but I was trying to push the USG and World Bank and IMF to stop it. Then, and I actually don't want to go into details because it's 30 years later and it's personalities and so forth. But some of my colleagues didn't do the right thing at Harvard. And they messed up, and it's public record, and people can look it up. And it was an unpleasant experience. It was part of my responsibility to tell them that they were in trouble, but it wasn't my responsibility to do anything about it. But again, I was a very known person. And so I was lumped together as the Harvard boys do Russia. Okay, this is media. You guys are the world's authorities on this. This is media. Once you got the media, you can't fight the media when you get these waves of slogans that are so good. So truly, let me say two things. The big part of this story is that the U.S. didn't want to help and didn't help in the 1990s on the economic side. But there's a second part of this story which is more important, which is that even with that, even with the financial crisis that Russia went through, which was very painful, even with the default of 1998 that Russia went through, which was very painful, Putin was not anti-American or anti-West or anti-Europe when he came to power. He wasn't in love with the U.S., let me put it that way, but he wanted normal relations. Even then, this did not set things in an inevitable course. It didn't help, but the real changes that put things in a disastrous course were on the security side. First, the expansion of NATO, then the bombing of Belgrade in 1999, 78 straight days of some harebrained, terrible scheme of Madeleine Albright, and to break apart Serbia, which was Russia's ally, and create Kosovo and put the largest NATO military base, Bondesteel, in Kosovo to cover Southeast Europe. Okay, Putin watched that. He didn't like that at all. Then came 9/11, and Putin said, okay, we want to cooperate with you. We can help. We also face insurgencies. We don't like this. The U.S. more or less brushed Russia off at that point. In 2002, the U.S. did something even more provocative and profound, which was to abandon the anti-ballistic missile treaty. This, for Russia, was a first-class security disaster, because the ABM treaty was viewed as a protection against a U.S. nuclear first strike. And this was viewed in an incredibly harsh way by Russia, and it is a massive danger. Then immediately in 2003 came the Iraq invasion over Russia's absolute objections, over the UN Security Council absolute objections. Then in 2004, came a NATO enlargement to 7 more countries, including the 3 Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, including 2 Black Sea countries, Bulgaria and Romania, and including 2 Balkans countries, Slovakia and Slovenia. So by 2007, then the temperature was up to here. And President Putin gave at the Munich Security Conference a very strong message. Stop this. Stop this. You are pressing right up against our red lines. Do not go further. And then famously in 2008, the U.S. announced a policy that had actually been adopted 14 years earlier, but it made it public, which was the demand that NATO would enlarge to Ukraine and to Georgia in the Caucasus. And this for Russia was unbelievable. Now Russia would be surrounded by NATO in the Black Sea region. And European leaders at the time called me privately. I had long conversations. What is your president doing? This is so reckless, so provocative. By the way, many of these same leaders now are completely mum. We love the United States. This has nothing to do with NATO, this war. Of course it's about NATO. The whole thing is about NATO. It's always been about NATO. And this was true in 2008. And then quickly to bring the story up to date, in 2011, again, these neocons doubled down. We're going to overthrow Syria, where Russia happens to have a naval base. We're going to overthrow Libya, where Russia has an ally. And we then took steps and in 2014 overthrew the government of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, on February 22nd, 2014. This was a coup in which the U.S. played a significant role. Sad to say, I saw some of it with my own eyes, which I did not want to see, but I did see some of it with my own eyes. The U.S. was up to its neck in that coup. And of course, the Russians knew it. They even did us a favor of intercepting Victoria Nuland's phone call with the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Piat, who's now a senior State Department official. Victoria Nuland's my colleague at Columbia University, unbelievably. And
that's the Yachts our guy call?
What's that?
That's the Yachts our guy call.
That's the Yachts our guy call. And the reason I saw some of it is that Yatsenyuk, who became the U.S. installed prime minister, called me, said, I want you to come talk to me about this economic crisis I'm in. Oh, my God. Well, I knew Ukraine. I had advised Kuchma. I did not understand exactly what had happened by any means. So when Yatsenyuk asked me to go there, I flew there. And this was just, I don't remember exactly, a day or a few days after Maidan, after the violent coup. And when I got there, an American or somebody representing an American NGO said, you want to go see the Maidan because we have a few hours before the meeting with the prime minister. And when we went to the Maidan, they explained to me how much American money had gone into pumping up the Maidan. I saw literally, we gave 50,000 to this one, 5,000 to this one, so forth. This NGO, extraordinarily unpleasant. I got the hell out of there that night. And this is the reality. So where did this war come from? It came from the fact that the U.S. was, we call it now Cold War 2.0, but it's really the same Cold War. It never really stopped. The U.S. had a campaign. Well, Russia is going to be second rate or maybe divided or decolonized, to use a favorite word in Washington. But we're going to continue this effort because they're on the other side. It turned out didn't have anything to do with Bolshevism, didn't have anything to do with communism, didn't have anything to do with democracy or not democracy. The U.S. did not want a big power there except one completely subservient to the U.S.
When do you think the Russian government figured that out? I mean, I know from living there at the time that sort of the ordinary person in Moscow or St. Petersburg, right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a lot of hope and enthusiasm that there was going to be this glorious partnership with the United States. And you mentioned your hopes that there would be kind of a new Marshall Plan. I know that there were people in Russia who were kind of hoping the cavalry would come and help stabilize their economy, and there would be this, this new flowering of a relationship. But it sounds like what you're saying and what you've written is that there was never any intention to really integrate Russia as any kind of democratic partner. I know when the ordinary Russians started to feel that that was going to not happen, I think Serbia was really a breaking point for them. But when do you think the Russians figured it out? Was it, by the time Putin came to power or before that? Or when did this relationship turn sour finally?
I think, look, the situation was very tough economically throughout this whole period. Gorbachev was reviled because of an economy that was in collapse already in the late 1980s. Shortages were everywhere, prices were soaring, living standards were falling, and there was tremendous disarray. When the Soviet Union ended, another dimension of disarray came because now you had 15 successor states that couldn't even manage the mechanics of trade among each other, even though they were deeply interconnected in physical supply chains. That used to be on the basis of orders from Gosplan, from the state planning ministry, but now that didn't exist anymore. So there weren't even mechanisms for trade. So for the person in the street, this was a terrible period, very difficult, very dark from the start. Maybe they hoped the U.S. would do something, and Bill Clinton did smile a lot and did toast Yeltsin and so forth. but I don't think anyone felt too warmly about the United States. I thought it was inevitable that we would help, because how could we not? The opportunity was so great. And so I said to President Yeltsin in December 1991, of course we're going to help. He said, we want to be a normal country. We want to have good relations. I said, of course, and we're going to help. It's going to be wonderful. And so I thought, and I'm, a little slow to learn, because I thought it was so right to do. I kept thinking in 1992, they'll figure it out. In 1993, Clinton's now in, they'll figure it out. No. Well, they never figured that part out. What I did not know, of course, and didn't pay attention to at the time, was the NATO side, that already basically they're planning the NATO enlargement. And now we know a lot more about the actual timing of that. Interestingly, as usual, there's a very pointed article by Zbig Brzezinski in 1997, published in Foreign Affairs magazine, where it's called Strategy for Eurasia. And he lays out a timetable for NATO enlargement to Ukraine, which he says will be 2005 to 2010. Now it's clear he was reporting actual policy. He wasn't just putting forward a Brzezinski plan. He was reporting what Washington had settled on, in fact. So I think things took time. But Yeltsin, I know that Putin was still optimistic about normal relations, good relations with Europe when he came to power, and even in the early 2000s. He's a cynical guy for understandable reasons, and maybe he never expected, like I did, that the West would actually help. But he thought, okay, we could still live together. And I know many Western European leaders, like wonderful Romano Prodi, former Prime Minister of Italy and former President of the European Union, who had very good relations with Putin, and Putin reciprocated the good relations. And it seemed just natural, even in the early 2000s, that things would be okay. And remember then in 2003 with the Iraq War, which the Russians hated, of course, many European countries were at that point ready to express opposition to the US. France and Germany said, no, this is a bad idea. So that was siding on the Russian side in a way. Now we have a full block where the US has put its foot down, and every word you hear from Western European politicians is yes, NATO, yes, NATO, yes, United States. But it wasn't like that in the early 2000s. So things got worse and worse over time.
And before you go, I wanted to get you to respond to the left-wing critique of your time as an economist, both in Bolivia, Poland, and beyond. Shock therapy became the name for this kind of series of neoliberal reforms that were applied to kind of run countries that were facing hyperinflation. The argument being it was too harsh, that it cut out too many government subsidies, that it broke the backs of kind of the stability that people needed, and fueled inequality. That's the kind of Naomi Klein critique of shock therapy would be along those lines. What's your response? What was your response at the time? How do you look back on it now?
Well, my response at the time was, and it's fun for me to look back to an interview that I gave to Lawrence Weschler in the New Yorker in 1989 when I was advising Poland. And he asked me, what are your views? I said, look, my favorite country's Sweden. I'm a social democrat. I have been a social democrat all along. So just to understand where I come from and what I advocate and what I believe today, I'm a kind of center-left social democrat in the Scandinavian style. That's always been my economic approach and economic philosophy, and it was true then. I'm a specialist, was then, and had some good results in ending hyperinflations. You don't end a hyperinflation by going from 24,000% this year to 12,000% next year to 6,000% the year after to 3,000% the year after. You actually end it immediately, by the way. And not because it's draconian. Actually, ending the hyperinflation is the basis for the society surviving. So by the time I got to Bolivia, there had been 6 years of utter chaos. And in the 12 months preceding my arrival, the inflation rate was 24,000%, which at the time was the seventh highest hyperinflation in world history. And I helped to end it, not by brutal means, but actually by the most normal way within a week, simply stopping a shambolic, disastrous mispricing of their one government resource, oil, which was being given away to rich people, which was being exported on barges across Lake Titicaca. And the hyperinflation came to an end immediately. And to show you my philosophy and my belief, they had defaulted on their debt. This was a completely bankrupt country. And the IMF said, okay, now you start paying your debts. And that's where I said, no way. This country is going to get debt cancellation. This is a poor country. It needs help urgently. This is not neoliberalism, excuse me. This is trying to help save a country that had fallen into one of the worst, deepest crises of peacetime in history. And it worked, by the way. They got the debts canceled. I will pat myself on the back to an important extent on that. And if you look at afterwards, I told them you'll go from an impoverished country in disarray and hyperinflation to just an impoverished country. And then you have to start economic development after that. But that's the first step, is get out of this complete chaos. And in Poland, I was truly a social democrat in that they had, and I expected afterwards, they would have a more public health system than the United States. They would have a more public education system than the United States. They would have more social protection than the United States. But they were in a collapse. So they needed debt cancellation, which I helped them arrange. They needed emergency stabilization. They needed a way out of a completely collapsed economy. And if you look at the results over the 30 years from 1989 onward, I was only involved for the first 3 or 4 years, but it set the stage for the fastest economic growth in the history of Poland. And essentially, if you want one measure of that, one basic measure, look at Poland's per capita income compared to Germany. In 1989, Poland's per capita income was about 1/3 of the German level. Now it's about 70% of the German level. In other words, it didn't close the gap with Germany, but it substantially closed the gap. That's what you want. That's what I said. That's what you could hope for in economic development, that you will not only have stability, but a normal economy. It is, by the way, essentially a social democratic economy, because national income going to government outlays for social protection, for health, for education, so forth, and for other purposes, around 40% of GDP, higher than the United States. So this is not the things that were said. By the way, I like Naomi Klein a lot. I admire her work a lot. And what she wrote about the shock doctrine of the U.S., which is we're going to run the world and we're going to run it our way, I think is accurate. I don't think she understood exactly what I was saying and trying to do. in terms of macroeconomics. So I never really very much liked the confusion, but I appreciate your asking about it. Gives me the chance to explain, but I explained it back in 1989. I'm a social democrat then. I'm pretty stubborn. I'm still a social democrat now.
Matt, I know you got to run pretty soon. Matt or Emily, any final questions or thoughts?
I was just going to ask Matt, reflecting even on our initial conversation in which you were reflecting on your experiences with your own front row seat to a lot of this that was transpiring in the 90s. If you have any thoughts on what we've heard from Dr. Sachs during this conversation.
Yeah, I guess I just have a general question because, I was there for the whole decade of the 90s, and by the end of it, I know a lot of people in the expat community, journalists were saying, this U.S. policy towards Russia is so strange. It's almost like they're trying to screw things up or that they're trying to destabilize this country. But it sounds like that might have actually been a plan security-wise, or at least that they were indifferent to the consequence of policies within Russia. Do you think it's logical to draw a straight line between what's going on right now, the complete tension between these two countries, and us being essentially in a proxy war with Russia, to the end of the Soviet Union when we decided we were going to adopt this posture towards Russia? Was there at any time a moment where we were actually trying to bring them in and as any kind of partner?
First, we're not in a proxy war with it. We're in a hot war. We're in a real war. We are not only providing the weapons, the financing, the munitions, the targeting, the intelligence, but we have our personnel in Russia, in Ukraine, fighting this war also. Not the soldiers in the uniforms and the boots on the ground, but there are a lot of U.S. weapon systems that have U.S. support. We're in this war. The Russians know it. They say so every day. It is a terrible risk for the world that this is the case. It is so wrong-headed, unnecessary, and threatening that the United States is provoking directly, militarily, with attacks, a war with the only other nuclear superpower. The only thing that can threaten the United States and its security is nuclear war, which can end everything and everybody. And we should understand, respect some red lines of your nuclear superpower counterpart. So we don't get that until today. We're still playing chicken. We're still playing games. We're still making lies. Now, what was the U.S. intent? The U.S. intent was not per se to destabilize Russia. The U.S. intent was U.S. unipolarity, that the U.S. will be the most powerful country in the world. It will have no rivals. It will have only essentially obedience to the U.S. demands. That was the goal. It was thought through already by Cheney and Wolfowitz in the defense documents of early 1992, and it never really changed. The idea is full spectrum dominance, unipolarity, liberal hegemony, terrible term because nothing liberal about it, hegemony by the United States. So Russia, okay, may be divided. I'm pretty convinced that the U.S. has supported Chechen rebels, for example, to eat away at the Russian soft underbelly in the late 1990s and early 2000s. The Russians say so, and I see a lot of evidence for it because we had a lot of fancy people who were on the Chechnya committee. What do they know about Chechnya? Nothing, except that they know that it is against Russia. And so we played a lot of dangerous games, mainly for what Brzezinski wanted, which was for Russia to be a second-rate country, to stop being a superpower. And that was the gambit all along. because the United States, in this so-called unipolar moment, wants to rule alone. It's a madness and it's a delusion when you're talking about huge, powerful countries with thousands of nuclear warheads. But the U.S. wanted its way. That's the point. It wanted to do what it wants, to put its military where it wants, to get the resources where it wants, to be able to dictate foreign policy as it wants. And that is the whole story from beginning to end. It did not want the nukes going off. It didn't want to bring Russia into such disarray that there would be disaster, but it did not want a strong competitor. It wanted a unipolar world.